My son called me a loser in front of a room full of strangers. His mother said nothing. Her husband just smirked, and I said nothing either. I paid the bill in silence, walked out into the cold, and by Monday morning, I had already begun taking back everything I'd ever given him. The car, the penthouse. The company he thought he built with his own 2 hands. My name is Reginald Covington. I'm 72 years old, and that night at the Gilded Fork taught me something I should have learned decades ago. Silence has many shades. And the most dangerous one is the kind you use to muffle a roar. The restaurant belonged to Richard Lawson's World, my ex-wife Brenda's new husband. Crystal chandeliers, silk, cashmere, the smell of money trying too hard. My old suit, 20 years worn but still sharp, didn't belong there. Neither did I, apparently. Andre sat across from me, performing for his wife Brittany, bragging about a second funding round I knew far more about than he did. Richard leaned back with his wine and delivered his usual backhanded compliment, that I was a fine engineer, but I lacked the spark to build an empire. Andre nodded like a disciple. Then when the check came, he stood up, chair scraping the floor, and announced to half the restaurant that I was a loser and Richard was a winner. I looked at my son. For 1 second, I saw the 5-year-old boy who used to ride on my shoulders in a plastic construction helmet. Then I stood, placed my napkin on the table, and walked out without a word. I didn't go home to sulk, I went home to work. In my study, surrounded by blueprints of bridges I'd actually built, I opened a folder on my old desktop labeled with names that meant nothing to anyone but me, Covington Holdings. Oakwood Properties, AC Tech Solutions. Every one of them was a thread I'd used to quietly weave the life Andre thought he'd built himself. I wrote one email to my attorney, Alicia Warren, a woman who'd been my strategist and confidant for 20 years. The subject line, Initiate Sunset Protocol. The body, meet at 8, begin dissolution proceedings, priority 1, the vehicle. The next morning, Alicia had coffee waiting, black, no sugar, the way I drink it when I mean business. She'd hoped we'd never need this plan. So had I, but the sun had set. I walked her through it, piece by piece, because she needed the human story behind the paperwork we'd built years ago as a contingency. 6 years earlier, Andre had come to me with a half-baked software idea, dripping with buzzwords and no discipline. I refused to fund him directly. Instead, I built him a stage. A silent trust in Delaware. A shell venture firm in California, fronted by a retired professor called Innovate Future Group. Andre flew out, pitched his idea, and came home believing Silicon Valley had discovered his genius. He never once asked who actually owned the firm that funded him. That firm holds 60% of AC Tech Solutions. Andre holds 20%. He isn't the owner of his company, he's its best-paid employee. Then there was the car, the BMW 7 Series he insisted, projected success. His credit couldn't support the lease, so the company leased it for him, except the lease wasn't with AC Tech. It was with Covington Holdings, an entity I control, disguised as a third-party fleet management company. The fine print was clear. The vehicle belonged to whoever held the job. The job could end any time, and the penthouse, the crown jewel of his fabricated success. Andre and Brittany had fallen in love with a luxury unit at the Oakwood. Convinced they'd landed the deal of a lifetime when the landlord offered a high-profile tenant incentive that dropped his rent to nearly zero. What Andre never knew was that I owned the entire building. I'd bought it 3 years earlier as a straightforward investment, long before he ever looked at a floor plan. The generous lease was fiction, engineered by a property management firm that worked for me, and it was contingent quietly. In Section 7, on his continued employment at a company I also controlled. His company, his car, his home. Every pillar of the empire he bragged about was rebar I'd poured myself, buried where he couldn't see it. Alicia asked what I wanted to do, hit him with everything at once, or something slower. I told her no blitz. That's demolition with dynamite, messy, indiscriminate, cruel. What I wanted was a controlled demolition. Remove the shiny things first, then the view, then the walls. Let him feel each loss individually so he understood exactly what he was losing and why. Monday, the car. Tuesday, the company accounts and Richard's consulting fees alongside them. Wednesday, the eviction notice. A curriculum, not a punishment. I spent the rest of that week pruning roses in my garden, thinking about how you sometimes have to cut a plant back hard, not out of anger, but because it's the only way it grows strong again. Andre called twice that weekend. I let both calls ring out. Brenda called once. I didn't even look at the screen. Their silence at that dinner table had been their answer. Mine was now mine. Meanwhile, oblivious, Andre spent his weekend bragging to friends about how he'd finally put the old man in his place. Brittany shopped for a diamond watch as compensation for the embarrassment of having a father-in-law who dared to leave a restaurant quietly. Richard fed Andre's ego over the phone, calling himself a real role model, a man whose entire livelihood, unbeknownst to either of them, was a single consulting contract with a company I owned. Sunday night at 10:01 p.m. an email arrived from Alicia. 6 words. The first domino has been pushed. Monday morning, Andre walked into his private garage in an Italian suit, feeling untouchable, and found a tow truck parked behind his BMW. He argued, he threatened, he called the leasing company, convinced it was a clerical error. It wasn't. The car was owned by Covington Holdings, a name that meant nothing to him and everything to me. He watched his symbol of success get dragged backward up the ramp and out of his life. Tuesday, he arrived at his office an hour late, humiliated further when his unlimited corporate card was declined in front of his own barista, in front of a line of onlookers. Upstairs, his login to the company's financial dashboard returned nothing but access denied. An email arrived from the office of the directorate announcing a full financial restructuring, all executive. Access suspended pending audit. Minutes later, Richard called, panicked, his consulting payment missing, his own bills suddenly at risk. The mentor who'd lectured Andre on being a winner was reduced to a man begging his protege for answers he didn't have. Wednesday, Andre came home to a wife unraveling from the social fallout, her own credit card frozen, their friends whispering. Then came the knock at the door, a stranger named Mr. Harrison, the Oakwood's new property manager, holding a formal eviction notice. Section 7, Clause C, the incentive lease was contingent on continued employment, and that employment, as far as ownership was concerned, no longer qualified. 72 hours to vacate. Brittany collapsed into hysterics, blaming Andre entirely, and in the wreckage of the notice, Andre found the final detail: the property belonged to Oakwood Properties, LLC. Another name. Another invisible hand. He realized all at once this wasn't bad luck. It was coordinated, and there was only one man clever enough, quiet enough, and now ruthless enough to have done it. He called me. His voice was pure venom. "You did this?" I told him it was time we talked, and less than 30 minutes later he was standing in my study, the same room where I'd launched the whole protocol, wrinkled suit. Sweat on his face, looking for the first time at my books and blueprints like he was seeing the command center they'd always been. I didn't raise my voice. I turned my monitor to face him and opened a folder labeled *, the foundation. One by one, I walked him through it: the shell venture firm, the trust, the shareholder agreement that gave me 60% control of the company he called his own, the BMW lease that was never his to keep, the building he'd been living in rent-free, owned by me for 3 years before he ever toured the unit. And finally, the detail that broke him completely: Richard Lawson's only client, the source of his mortgage and his lifestyle and his superiority, was a $50,000 a month contract with Andre's own company. The winner his mother traded me for had been living off the loser's money the entire time. Andre made a small, broken sound and said nothing else. There was nothing left to argue. I told him the truth, gently now, that this was never about destroying him, only about destroying the lie he was living inside of. Every dollar I'd handed him quietly over the years hadn't been love. It had been enabling. I told him the trust still existed, his name still in it, but he wouldn't see another cent until he'd built something real with his own hands. "Go get a job," I said, "a real one. Learn what a dollar costs when you earn it yourself. Learn who you are with nothing." Then I closed my laptop and I walked out of the room, leaving him alone with the truth. I don't know where he went that night. I didn't ask. My part in that chapter was finished. The days after were the quietest I'd known in 30 years. No frantic calls, no manufactured emergencies requiring my silent financial rescue. Just peace. A week later, I sat on my back porch with a glass of iced tea, rocking slowly, the scent of jasmine thick in the evening air. And I understood something I'd spent decades avoiding. I had never been the loser. I had been the host to a parasite, quietly feeding a life I was never thanked for building. Now, finally, I was free of it. My phone rang. Brenda. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Her voice, when it came, wasn't composed or condescending like it had been at that dinner. It was raw panic. Richard's consulting contract was gone. The bank was foreclosing on their lake house. His leased Mercedes was being repossessed. Her country club membership had been suspended. And somehow in her mind, all of it was my fault, my jealousy, my cruelty, my refusal to keep funding a life she felt entitled to. I let her finish. Then I said 4 words, calm and final. That is no longer my problem. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the table. The rocking chair kept its slow, steady rhythm. Fireflies blinked in the dark. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like exactly what my son had once called me, except the truth had reversed itself completely. I was not the loser. I never had been. It took 72 years to learn this, but I finally understand it now. Financial support is not the same thing as love. And patience mistaken for weakness will eventually get mistaken for permission. Real strength isn't in how much you give. It's in having the courage to stop giving when giving has become the thing destroying the person you love. Sometimes the most devastating act of love a parent can offer is to take everything away, so that a person finally has to stand on solid ground and learn, for the first time, how to build something that is actually theirs. If you were in my position, sitting at that table, hearing your own son call you a loser in front of a room of strangers, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments.